We would love to listen to your lecture on the Japan's perspective and position on this growing the cooperation, military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. And you have about 15 minutes, and then you can just give a lecture. And then if you are ready to go, and then just go, please.
Thank you very much once again for this great opportunity. So today I will talk mostly about North Korea-Russia cooperation from Japan's perspective. But before I go to Japan's perspective, I would like to touch a little bit upon how we could interpret the growing strengthening of North Korea-Russia relations from a more broader perspective. The first point I want to talk about is that we must see Russia as a major player that still has a significance and tremendous influence in the direction of Northeast Asian security environment. Because there has been a tendency in post-Cold War period, and especially in this century, to focus mainly on China, understandably, and threats originating from North Korea. And there has been some assumption of somewhat viewing Russia as something like a secondary sideline actor in Northeast Asian security dialogue and discussions. But this recent Russia-North Korea relations remind us once again that Russia is not only a major factor in Europe, but also fully capable of making its presence felt in Northeast Asian security by its own engagement. The second point is that we hear a lot about a new Cold War, so-called, that has already started in Europe as well as in Northeast Asia. And this division is, of course, between liberal democracies allied to the United States on the one hand, and China, Russia, and North Korea on the other, in case of Northeast Asia. And the recent North Korea Russia relations illustrate that these countries on the other side, so called, could mutually benefit from strengthening their own camp in the midst of this international level division. What I mean by that is North Korea could use this opportunity of closely aligning itself with Russia as a way to weaken international pressure and somehow making situational better for itself in terms of regional isolation that it is going through itself, especially in the midst of this current economic difficulties at home that we hear about. And so it is beneficial for North Korea to also have so-called the other options, diversified options, and mainly relying on China and just getting support from China, especially now that the North Korea-China relations is reported to be somewhat complicated in some areas. So the signing of this comprehensive strategic partnership, recent one between Russia and North Korea, could motivate North Korea to adopt more aggressive stance toward the United States and its allies, including South Korea and Japan, of course, by using this as a new leverage. Now, from Russia's perspective, strengthening its relations with North Korea, but not only with North Korea, but with other Asian states, as we see in Vietnam too, could mean that it could balance its isolation in Europe by giving an additional source of concern for US and its allies by shifting its attention outside of Ukraine. So these are the 2 points that I would like to talk about, that I would like to mention about the broader implication of North Korea-Russian relations. Now, if I move on to the Japan's perspective and how North Korea-Russia relation is being viewed, the first and the foremost factor that I would like to emphasize is that from Japan's perspective, the biggest concern is a transfer of military technologies from Russia to North Korea, especially in the area of ballistic missiles. As we all know, Japan is very vulnerable, probably the most vulnerable, along with South Korea, in terms of North Korea's missile threats. And of course, North Korea's most ICBM and satellite launch tests are done by shooting in the direction of Japan, meaning eastward or southward. And so any technology transfer that would enhance North Korean capability in missile areas is of grave concern for Japan for obvious reasons. But it's not only technologies concerning ballistic missiles, though, because Russia could provide North Korea with other technology that could be used in military areas, especially such as spy satellites and anything to do with nuclear or aviation, especially in modernizing North Korea's very old Air Force and submarine technologies. But not only submarine itself, but anything to do with an SLBM related technology that is also grave concern for Japan. And that is why Japanese news coverage and expert analysis about the recent President Putin's visit to North Korea, and also Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia's Amur region last year in September, extensively focused on this specific point of weapons or military technology transfer, the potential of that. The second is point I would like to emphasize from Japan's perspective is that, as we all know, Japan is a very important U.S. ally in the Asia Pacific, and it has actively promoted security cooperation among so-called like-minded countries against the expansion of authoritarian states' influence in the region. But mainly, this was targeted against China, as we all know. Um, but but the recent Russia North Korea uh, engagement cooperation means therefore it could become a counterweight to already existing U.S. Japan and U.S. South Korea alliances in addition to these Japan initiated like-minded countries' cooperation as an additional point of concern for Japan into an already significant rivalry and the threat perception that Japan feels toward China. And In addition, Japan has been taking part in various international sanctions against North Korea, mainly the United Nations initiated sanctions for North Korea's nuclear tests and missile launches. But in addition to that, Japan also has imposed its own unilateral sanctions against North Korea for those same reasons, in addition to the abduction issue, which I will mention later a little bit. Um, and and all these participation in sanctions by Japan against North Korea is in the hope to isolate and pressure North Korea in the international community so that it would help Japan's dealing with North Korea. But if North Korea uh, cooperates further more extensively with Russia and aided by Russia, not only in military areas, but potentially in broader areas such as economic and diplomatic front as well, from Japan's point of view, it could possibly undermine Japan's efforts and Japan's position vis-a-vis North Korea because it would give in a way, a breathing space to North Korea. And the last part I would like to talk about is that regarding the war in Ukraine, Japan has been very supportive of Ukraine in the current war from the very beginning. And this is a bit different from the position of most other Asian countries, especially the ones in Southeast Asia, that has, comparatively speaking, that have had traditionally long-term relations with Russia and who have more who have more understanding toward Russian arguments. But Japan, in that regard, has been very clear from the beginning that Japan supports Ukraine as a liberal democratic camp member. And but with North Korea's help, uh, it is widely reported that it is possible that this war could further prolong by North Korea's help uh, to Russia. And what this could possibly mean from Japan's point of view is that although it is not a direct influence, it could have long-term implication in U.S. security policy direction, especially now that we are facing the presidential election in the US. So depending on how the war would continue, how further it would prolong, and what kind of president would come in the US and how the US president would see that new situation, it could have an indirect influence in US's dealing with Japan. And that is obviously of a point of concern as well. I was asked to talk about any other uh, topic that would be intriguing and provocative regarding Japan. And I would like to mention 2 points. The first one is in Japan, eh, not specifically about Japan, it is common in any other country as well. There has been a strong tendency to analyze and explain anything about North Korea, including North Korea's security, uh, any North Korean affairs, mostly from its relations with China. So all the analysis has been North Korea-China relations and how much influence China has. But this recent development between North Korea and Russia, therefore, has been somewhat of a shocking reminder that it's not only about North Korea and China that we need to analyze and research, but it's North Korea-Russian relations. It's actually very important too, and it must be regarded on equal footing, at least as significant as North Korea's relations with China. And from Japanese academia and media coverage and of course Japanese experts on North Korea have known this all along, but the more broader trend has been just focusing on China. So this new development would be a good reminder that North Korea-Russia relations need to be taken much more seriously. After all, Russia, well, the Soviet Union at the time, it's a father of the establishment of North Korea, and Russia has always been regarded highly and respected in North Korea. And finally, one point that I would like to mention before I end my talk is this one quite often overlooked aspect of Japan's relations with North Korea, that is the abduction issue. It is not an overlooked aspect in Japan, but it is in outside Japan when we talk about Japan's relation with North Korea. It is often overlooked because it's not a direct security matter as in missile or nuclear threat, but it is, from Japan's perspective, a very, very important and one of the primary issues that the hurdle that needs to be overcome if we were to see any improvement in Japan-North Korea relations. And I will not go into exactly what this issue is, but this issue became an official issue, bilateral issue in 2002, but there has been a long deadlock in this resolution. And but first, for interesting reasons that we are not really all clear, there have been some statements from both governments in recent month actually, uh, that there might be possibility of a renewal of talk, and also interestingly, some of the victims who came back to Japan have started speaking out more on media about this as well. Um, of course, we haven't seen any result. We haven't seen any fruition of this background backstage negotiation in any way. But there has been some talks as to something might be happening. So at this point, one interesting question would be, would this North Korea-Russia cooperation have in any way influenced the possibility of this backstage negotiation between Japan and North Korea? Meaning, uh, maybe if North Korean leadership sees the possibility of themselves too much getting pressure from Japan, maybe it might give less incentive in the minds of North Korean leadership to talk with Japan now that North Korea has these breathing space and additional support in the region, and North Korea could kind of ameliorate, could weaken its own isolation in the region at this point.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you
Yes.
so much, Ishu, for your, short presentation, and then it was very, very informative, at the same time intriguing, and then with
Thank
a lot
you.
of provocative, issues, to discuss. And then let me ask you, a few questions, from different point of view, or your own, based upon, of course, based upon your lecture. And then my first and I think foremost important question is, what will be Japan's next move, to this North Korea, Russia military cooperation at the treaty level. And then many people argue that it has a strategic element in it. Strategic is can be translated into nuclear dimensions. You mentioned that. And then, what other, Japan's strategic move, toward or to respond to, this type of, bilateral, development? That's my first question.
Yes, thank you for your question. It is still very much an ongoing issue. So, well, I think we need to be a little careful about what Japan's next move would be vis-a-vis North Korea and Russia. Because as I mentioned before, I think for a lot of Japanese, even for experts, it must have been a very shocking that North Korea and Russia would go that far and sign a de facto almost a military alliance of comprehensive strategic partnership. So I think Japanese media coverage and the expert discussions that I have seen are mostly um, of reporting exactly what has been discussed between North Korea and Russia, and that the possibility that it would be a counterweight military alliance that would balance the U.S. dominance in the region. But further than that, exactly what Japan would do uh, in case the as I said, the weapons transfer and the specific Russian support for North Korea actually become reality. I think the Japanese government is still very much carefully discussing all these possibilities. So
Yeah.
it would be difficult for us to exactly like how they would move in case these become possibilities. But one thing about what we could say about Japan is that Japan will discuss and Japan will ally itself and align itself even closer and to toward the United States and the liberal democratic camp to counter this along with its partners and like-minded countries.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's you discuss about the Ukraine, Russia war front right now, and then Japan has been very, say, consistent, to support, Ukraine, against, Russia in this, war situation, and this in Russia, North Korea, rapprochement, and then the fact that the North Korea actually prolonged, as you just argued, this war by providing ammunition 152, 122 millimeters. At the same time, ballistic missiles, which is a very, very big concern, for the military, expert, for the North Korea testing its own ballistic missiles, not just ICBM, but short range and the mid range missiles in the war ground, battleground. So and Japan might have a tit for tat type of action, to, Ukraine-Russia war situation. And then that might be, connecting this, the European, the security theater, and then Asian, East Asian security theater. Is that exactly what, the Zigubienu Brzezinski's, the grand chessboard, type of, grand strategic game, started. So and then at the same time, China is playing a very important role. And then you say, Japan, toward China, it's a US and then Japan alliance actually, and the Indo-Pacific strategy aiming at, China. But now, Japan need to think about, very, bluntly, Russia's, presence, security presence in here. And then you can see this, China, and then Russia, and then North Korea. Many people say this trilateral, say, virtual alliance, it's emerging. But say, some people argue that, China is a very difficult position by this, Russia, and North Korea, Russia, military, say, alliance, you can say. So do you think it's in that sense, China and then Japan might have some sort of, the common ground, on especially nuclear proliferation and the nuclear issue, to deal with this Russia, and then North Korea at the same time?
In the broadest sense, I believe that Japan and China could potentially have a common ground in limiting or pressuring North Korea not to provoke further in terms of nuclear capabilities, in terms of Northeast Asian security. China also has a stake in stable regional security environment. So, in that very, very broad sense, China and Japan would be sharing that idea regarding North Korea. But on the other hand, Japan has traditionally, in the post Cold War period, and especially in this century, has viewed China more than anything else as the biggest potential threat in Japan's security. So even if they do have this uh, common ground regarding North Korea, I'm not really sure how much that would lead to a further or more detailed or more stepped in security cooperation between Japan and China in that regard.
Thank you for. I mean, it's getting more complicated. I think this is a cliche for, security studies, and in all time. But I think it's getting more complicated in the Northeast Asia, East Asian, security theater. So my last question, before I will let you go, is, what will be, the impact, of this, Russia, and then North Korea, Russia rapprochement on, Japan, South Korea, Japan, bilateral relationship?
I think that depends on how Japan views the future of South Korea Japan relations in security realm. What I mean by that is, as you know, at this point, both South Korea and Japan sees this new Russia-China relations and this a comprehensive strategic partnership as a threat, as a counter weight to South Korea, U.S. and South Korea Japan relations, because at this point, Japan South Korea relations, at least in security areas, is more cooperative than in the past. And of course, Japan would love to, I believe that Japan would like to see it kept in that way. But but a lot of these discussions regarding East Asian security in Japan, what we constantly hear from the Japanese perspective is what would happen if presidency or a certain regime change happens in South Korea, and if South Korea sort of has a shift or a change in its strategic view, then how would Japan deal with that in several years from now? So at this point, South Korea and Japan, we both share that this new development is detrimental to Northeast Asian security as strong allies to the U.S. And Japan is willing to cooperate with South Korea. But in the future, there is always at the back of some of the Japanese experts' mind is that what would happen? Would there the subtle nuance of how a new elites in South Korea in the years to come, how would they view the situation? Because in case of Japan, this position is not likely to change. As I said before, Japan has made its strategic position very clear, and it's very strongly in the side of the liberal democratic camp as ally to the U.S. And they're actually trying to strengthen it. So it's not going to change. But what would happen to Korea? That's the main question for Japanese.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, great discussion. And then we learned a lot, and then I think so we have a lot more, issues, to discuss, near future. Thank you for, coming and then joining this, session with us. And then we are looking forward to cooperate, in the coming months and in coming years in this venue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the time.